All right, so welcome to Questions I'm Asking. My guest today is Ben McBride. Ben is the co-founder of Empower Initiative. He's an author, a writer. He's a friend of mine, I would like to say. He's been an activist for a long time. And today we're going to talk a little bit about belonging. And Ben, when you hear that word belonging, what comes to mind for you? Not just necessarily as a leader, but like for you individually.
Yeah, when I think of belonging, I think of the idea of there being enough space for me to exist as I am without negotiation, without apology, enough space for me to be. And when I think about belonging in relationship to others, I think about a space, a way of being where we all get to show up as our true selves without negotiation and apology.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Just being who you are, right? Like I have a coal miner friend. That's what he says all the time. Be who you say you are. But it's more about you honoring your words with your actions. But I think about that. So can you tell me can you remember a moment where you felt unmistakably like you belonged?
Yeah. The thing that comes to me initially is a moment where I'm in the vehicle on my way to my cousin's house with my siblings, and we're on our way to our family gathering that we used to do in a little suburb called Fairfield in California, right outside of San Francisco, maybe about 45 minutes or so. But I'm in the car with my siblings, my parents. We're on our way to a place where I know there's going to be love. I know there's going to be acceptance. I know there's going to be good food. I know we'll probably get in trouble while we're there for doing something we're not supposed to be, but it was that kind of container of being in a place with people where I knew I could be myself and knowing that I was on a journey to be with others where I could be myself. That's the first memory that comes to me when I think of like, I know I belonged. It was where I was. It was also where I was going.
Oh, nice. I love it. I also love that. I think in addition that you threw in there that doesn't get thrown in when we talk about belonging is that you talk about there were people there that would like discipline you or correct you when you stepped out, right? And not in and I think sometimes we think of that belonging as I'm okay, you're okay, or something where there's no accountability for your action.
Right.
So I love that
Right.
note. So why? So along those lines, why do you think belonging is so fragile right now? Like we talk about the epidemic of loneliness, and people are seeking belonging in all kinds of some healthy and some remarkably unhealthy ways. Why do you think it's so fragile, like right now?
Well, I think the environment's changed a lot. And, when you and I met first virtually, I think it was in the middle of a pandemic, during the middle of one of the graduate programs or doctorate programs. I think that you
Yeah,
were.
shout out to your brother Mike.
Oh, yeah, Mike McBride brought me in order to add some contribution to talk about some of the work that have been doing alongside he and others around the gun violence work. The reason I go there first is, to me, what I learned through the gun violence work in Oakland was that we have such an inherent need for belonging that we will even choose to belong to negative expressions of belonging in order to satisfy our need for belonging. Like, it is so core to us as mammals. And so one of the things that when I think about why it's such a difficult dynamic right now is because we have a deep need that is physiological, has nothing to do with character. And yet, because we are mammals, we're wired to respond to our environments in a way that either cause us to feel like we belong or cause us to feel like that sense of belonging is threatened. And I think we have an inability right now to really recognize that a lot of the tension and the anxiety that a lot of us are feeling has nothing to do with character, even though there are character issues. It doesn't
Sure.
have anything to do with ideology, although there is ideology that's problematic. A lot of what we're feeling is the environmental change that is happening in a way that is faster than our ability to cope with. And so, as a mammal, when we start feeling like I'm not sure that I belong. I'm not sure who my people are. I'm not sure that the new rules that are that are informing how it is that I understand my safety. Those things are changing, and I'm not sure that I have enough time to understand, ask questions, adapt, etc. When those things are happening, along with technological change happening around us, in the sense of I've gone from a world where I used to know 100 people and that felt like a lot. And now I'm in a world where I feel like I know 10,000 people. The rules have changed. Like the idea of knowing someone is no longer actually us going and sitting down and going for a walk in the park or meeting at church or working with each other. That's now gone to, if we're connected on social media, this is my friend. Like all of these things and the rules are changing. And so I think people are really struggling with the feeling of belonging and wondering whether the world around them is safe anymore. And I think when we start feeling like the world's not safe, we start really grasping for ways to make it more safe. And usually that shows up as exclusion. It shows up as othering. It shows up as questioning people's morals. It shows up as dehumanizing other people. And it's not always because, oh, I'm just a horrible person or I think horribly about others. I think a lot of times it's our amygdala, which is the part of our brain that is really going, I'm not so sure we're okay in this new environment, trying to find a way to make ourselves okay. And I think if we're able to understand that, it can give us some access to some empathy and some understanding over moving directly towards judgment. And if I feel excluded, well, then I'm going to exclude those who I feel are excluding me. And now we've actually turned ourselves into the very thing that we abhor.
Man, that's good. That's some good stuff. When you were talking, what it reminded me of, I was thinking about boundaries, right? You talked about your going to your family's house, and like you knew that there were you were accepted and stuff. I don't know why, but in that same class, we talked about Cabrini-Green in Chicago, and infamous, famous, it depends on who you talk to, right? Like, and one of the this guy that I knew who worked down at a church in Chicago grew up there, and he grew up in Cabrini-Green, and he loved, like it's like it was a great community. We, everybody knew everybody, all this stuff, but it was also rife with gang violence and turf wars and all this stuff, right? All the things that folks outside Chicago heard about Cabrini-Green, and they tore it down, and all the gangs where they knew their turf was got sort of spread out, and nobody knew what the turf, and so the gang violence just like totally erupted in a much different way and all spread out. So people didn't know where to go, where to be, all that stuff. So that's not what you were talking about, but as you were talking about that was what made me think about how when the sort of like upset the apple cart, and then we don't know where to go, and sometimes we end up following negative patterns out of fear rather than because we don't know where we belong.
No doubt. And even like this case study you're lifting up with Cabrini-Green, to me is like a perfect definition of like what I talk about radical belonging, in the book, and ways that you and I've talked about and got a chance to talk about in community, which is really the idea of, because we are all different, how do you co-create with people who are different to create a circle, a container that's big enough for all of us to thrive? And what's interesting to me about the example you just gave is that Cabrini-Green wasn't perfect, but yet there was an active co-creation happening that also still had enough margin for there to be harm and ways that people course corrected and negotiation. Like the dynamics that happened at Cabrini-Green were not different from what happens in most hoods in urban core centers around the country, where there were rules where it was like, yo, if you were involved in the life, we don't harm citizens. That meant people who weren't in the life. That meant we don't mess with the old people. That meant you don't mess with the kids. Certain people get a pass. All these different dynamics. Now, someone might say, well, that's a very imperfect idea of belonging. And I'm like, yeah, for sure. I totally get that. And it still, though, is a model, just like our democracy is in the larger country model. It's a model of trying to figure out how do you co-create with people who are different, which doesn't mean assimilation where everybody's got to be the same. It means that we've got to find a way to come up with a social contract with each other, a set of ways that we're going to, a set of agreements around how we're going to engage with each other so that we can have a sense of thriving. And And I love the Cabrini-Green example that you lifted up because it is imperfect. And I think, maybe if we're going to ever get to a place of belonging in the country and in the world, maybe that's one of the first things that a place like Cabrini-Green could teach us all is to be a little bit more comfortable with the imperfections that are just a part of human engagement.
Yeah, I mean, my brain is all over the place right now because I'm thinking about a book I read a while back. Now I can't remember. I think it was by the guy that wrote the *Sapiens* book. But and he was talking about those agreements, and he was talking about the sort of the democracy and in Washington and what the agreements were, and unwritten rules and all this stuff, and then this. Well, he's talked about Newt Gingrich, but if we're going to name names, sort of like deciding that they're not rules, we can do whatever we want, and then sort of like it messed up the agreements, and then sort of all kind of different stuff happened because we didn't know what the agreements were anymore, and the stuff we thought we knew.
Yeah.
But I think I also think it's hilarious to me in my life. I've done that. Like I'm now like Cabrini-Green as a model, right? Like growing up in the like 80s and 90s where Cabrini-Green was like Candyman and like Cabrini-Green was like the like oh no, like the horror story of what projects look like. All right, so here's but I think maybe I was engaging in indictment before investigation, which is a phrase that you or that you've been recently writing about, and I think on your Substack, which is you've been new on a Substack, but I've been enjoying what I've written. In fact, I like read stuff, and I'm like, man, Ben's just saying the things that I think, but I don't have the the articulation to say it. I'm just like, yeah, what he said. Like I'm like, I'll just read your stuff. Be like, what Ben said. That's what I'm out. So, why do you think we move so quickly when those agreements get disorganized? Why do we move so quickly to judgment and like indictment? Like so we move so quickly to, oh, I got to get them because they're gonna get me. Like why is that just a mammalian thing that we're just like, that's the way we're wired? So it's like, or
it is how it is we're wired. And, I think, kind of going back to you were, referencing Harari and, the particular part you were talking about was coming out of his second book, Homo Deus, and, which was the twin book to Sapiens that you were referencing. And, I think a part of the challenge that, and he lifts this up for us is that there are real restrictions that we have as a part of our journey. Now, I know different people have different thoughts about, us as Homo sapiens and us as mammals and the whole conversation around evolution and creation and a lot of different ways that people come to the story about who we are. I think one of the things that we have to hold, though, is that the limitations that we have are really living within our brains and the way that our nervous system and our body responds to the outside world. And what all the science points to is this notion that our brain is trying to take, and Dr. Jennifer Eberhardt talks a lot about this in her book, Bias, that our brains are trying to take all of this information and organize it into helping us understand and quickly qualify threat or thriving. It's trying to make sense of that and give us a way forward. And so I think when a lot of different things begin to happen that are sparking our nervous system, which are really informed by the stories that we were told by the people who raised us, right? The people who raised us, they gave us the handles around what you should be afraid of or what you should be comfortable around. And so when those things begin to change or be threatened, our nervous system is telling us, you're in danger, brother, sister, relative, like you're in danger. You need to respond. And so, like the thing you were referencing that I learned from AA, something in the big book, as they call it, contempt prior to investigation. And so often what we end up having is contempt for things that we don't really know whether this thing can hurt me or harm me, but I'm accessing a story that I've learned either through someone that I love, or maybe, it's a story that was told to me. And instead of investigating whether this person, this situation, this coming change is an actual threat, I'm like through with it from the beginning. Because I've also learned through my life, like these are the ways that I keep myself safe, right? My parents told me don't touch the stove. And maybe I never touched the stove, but I saw my brother or my older sister touch the stove, and then I saw them get a burn and I saw them crying. So now my whole orientation may not just be about a hot stove, it's just about the stove, period.
Sure.
Like I'm staying away from the stove, right? So I think a part of this journey that we're in right now is really that challenge, Greg. I think the change that's happening around us is so fast, and it's around everything. And I think I would also say, and this is like, I love social media, and so this isn't a bang on social media, but I do think social media has also given us an unlimited access to information that our brains do not have the adequate time. We're not wired to process this much information about so many things in the rapid period of time that we're being asked to. So we are actively being reprogrammed as Homo sapiens right now around how to function, which is putting us under a lot of stress. And so some of the responses that we have a lot to do, man, I think with just our brains trying to keep up with how fast the world is changing.
I think I think you're right. I love that. As you were talking, I was thinking about a article I read, and I mean, this is probably 15, 20 years ago, and it talked about the amount of information that a person received in 1900, in their life, was equivalent to the front page of the New York Times in 2000.
Wow.
Of one day, right? So the amount of information you received, and I might be getting that wrong, but that's how I remember it. It was that stark. It was like when in 1900 you had, this is the amount of information you got. Now we got a whole bunch of different. The world is vastly different than it was in 1900 versus 2000 versus 2026. But that I think you're dead on about the amount of information. We just don't have the capacity to deal with the amount of information that we get. And I was also thinking about what you were talking about, especially with the stove story. And we talked earlier about no bad parts and those moments in your life, those teachings that you have in your life. And so you react in a way because that's what you need. That's what your brain decided you needed for safety in that moment. And maybe you did, right? But so I was thinking about that investigation, contempt without investigation or before investigation. So like you said, like, oh, the stove is bad. And like, yeah, the stove can be bad, but maybe not in every situation. And maybe you're not 5 years old and don't understand how knobs work, right? Like, so I think about that in situations in my own life where I'm engaging in a situation, and then at some point in my life, I had that situation happen, and I was in danger or felt attacked, whatever. But then I have to slow down to say my body reacts in a way that I'm trying to say, like, oh, that's not what's happening here. Like that, taking that second to.
Well, let me give you one more analogy too that just popped up for me as you were talking. Like, as you were saying that, you was making me think about my own life, and I'll say it like concisely. When I was a kid, the police were okay. Like my dad never framed the police as not being okay to me when I was a kid. But then as I became a teenager, then my dad was like, and I started driving and being out, then the police were framed to me as this group of people that I had to be concerned about that potentially could be a threat to me. And then once I graduated high school and was a couple years out, my same dad came back to me and said, the San Francisco police are hiring. You should go apply for a job. You'd probably be good to do that. And then a few years later than that, my brother got beat up, Mike, by the police, and now the police were bad again. And then several years later, we had some family members that became the police, and the police were good again. And then the Ferguson movement, and I started doing ceasefire and all that work. And the police. So in one institution, right, based on the environment, my definition from the people who I loved was defining an institution as good or bad. And so think about what is happening inside my body and my nervous system around how I'm supposed to relate to this static institution, but it's really not static because it's about how it's being defined and my relationship to it. And so I think we could take that metaphor and use it in a lot of different ways. I think that's what is happening for a lot of us in relationship to a lot of things.
Yeah, you told a story in your book, and I've heard you say it, your buddy that went to Ferguson with you, who was a former police officer, white guy, and you were. I feel like the story is you were standing there with the kids and sort of on a line on the other side with the police, and he sort of stayed back because he was like, I don't know if I belong, right? Like that, like I don't know if they want me there, right?
Right.
Which I love that. I love that story. But I was thinking about this. I was thinking about that a couple years ago. We have this men's retreat, and there's this guy. He's since passed, but he was a law enforcement. Like that was his career. And he said something to me. Like I feel like at church we don't ever talk about the cops when these things happen. Like when we have things like Ferguson or stuff's going on in Minneapolis, all that stuff. Like we don't ever talk about the police officers or what they're going through. And it sort of and I've had all kind of friends that were in law enforcement or first responders and that kind of stuff, and who've been solid people, right? So, and then also I have this other framing. Like every time I see a police officer, I feel guilty, even though mostly I'm fine. Although I might be guilty. It just it depends. But so, hey, I remember walking around. We went on this hike, and he was talking about his stories and talking about the life, and then he died, and then we had something happen with law enforcement here, and it wasn't one of those clear cut ones, right? It was there was some. I mean, I thought it was clear cut, but there was some more debate that seemed reasonable, and I said something about praying for those people who are being sent out to do unlawful things, like we were talking about praying for the law enforcement as people, not just as this institution, right? And how do we separate that institution? So, but I remember I've been thinking about that the whole time. Is like, how do I continue to be in that conversation? And I want to jump back into this contempt without investigation, and why. How can you tell if someone has formed a conclusion about someone or something without investigating the story? Or how do you think about in your own self, or how might, if that's helpful?
Yeah, that might be a little bit more easy for me to access. I think when contempt prior to investigation shows up for me, it's when I am showing up with judgments without evidence. It's when I am when I'm becoming conscious that there are pre-existing narratives, stereotypes, judgments that I have about a particular group of people, about an organization, an institution, a scenario, where there is actually no evidence that is the case. And for me, growing in awareness around contempt prior to investigation is actually leaning into something that Dr. Sean Jenwright in the book, The Four Pivots, talks about great, which he calls it the mirror work. And so he says too many of us show up to the moments of injustice or inequity with our lens. And he says the good thing about a lens is, yes, it enables you to make meaning of things in your life, but what he's inviting is we need to lean into more of what he calls the mirror work, which is to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, well, why am I thinking that? Why am I feeling that? Why is that the conclusion that I've come to? So instead of jumping to the lens, which doesn't mean that your lens is not helpful.
Sure.
Lenses help us be able to analyze things, but instead of only having a lens, how do you actually step back and do the mirror work? And so for me, the way that I measure my contempt prior to investigation is through the mirror questions. Is why, when did I start thinking that? And immediately what happens is the focus becomes not on what's happening, and it becomes a much more reflective. And I find that there is a treasure chest of opportunities to explore what's happening in me
Sure.
so that I can show up to whatever it is that I'm seeing better.
Yeah. My wife and I always talk about like the only way through is in. Like you got to come in to yourself, and
Yeah.
then that's the path through to others. So that reaching out and that being open to that investigation. If I wanted to try to resist contempt without investigation starting tomorrow, what's a small practice that I could try? Like we've talked a little bit about the like mirror and that kind of stuff, but for some folks, some of us dig into the nerdy brain worlds a lot. But for like average Joe or Jane or Jill, what does it look like tomorrow to resist contempt without investigation? Like what's a small thing they could do maybe?
The small thing I would do is create what I call a speed bump practice, right? So we all know speed bumps don't stop aggressive drivers from being aggressive drivers. What they do is they slow aggressive drivers down on the streets where they drive. So create a speed bump practice for you. And that could look something like this. Get clear about one area that you want to show up differently in your life and come up with a practice that slows you down. Could be one question that you ask yourself. So for example, if you get all animated around political dynamics, when you find yourself
not me.
becoming engaged around politics or whatever you're reading, instead of jumping to, I can't believe those people, so on and so forth, have a speed bump practice that says, I think I'm going to slow myself down and I'm going to ask myself, who's one person that I might be able to talk to who has that perspective that can share with me a little bit more around that idea. And you're entering that. So it's about, how do I slow myself down and have a conversation? How do I slow myself down and say, actually, I'm going to pick up a book or pick up an article and read a little bit more about it to understand more deeply the perspective of the thing that's upsetting me. This could be happening in somebody's family life. There's a practice in Japanese culture called ma. It's the practice of the pause. Like couples are known that in order to not find themselves in a lot of relationship conflict, when they find themselves having an intense moment in culture, right? They lean into the practice of ma, which is we stop talking. It's a speed bump practice.
Sure.
We go away from each other for 10 to 15 minutes. We sit down until our nervous system relaxes and enables us to get a little bit more conscious. And then we come back and have some conversation with each other. So I don't, necessarily have like a set practice that anybody can just do.
Sure.
The speed bump practice is what comes to mind, which is come up with one thing that can work for you that slows yourself down from jumping to judgment or jumping to contempt. So find a slow down practice that invites yourself into investigation. And even a better word for investigation for me is that invites yourself into curiosity.
Okay. Curiosity. I like that. So what's your speed bump practice?
Depends on the scenario. The one that comes up for me quickly is in the context of work. I am a recovering workaholic.
Sure.
And anyone that seems to get in the way of me accomplishing the goals that I'm trying to accomplish when I'm working, I have the tendency to easily jump to contempt. It's like, what did you do, et cetera, et cetera. So my speed bump practice is about two things. One, do not respond within 24 hours to something that I feel like is not happening the way that it should. Because what that slows me down to do is gives me a chance to get extra information that probably I'm not getting when I'm just like, I can't believe you dropped the ball like that. How in the world could you do that? I take 24 hours. That helps slow me down. Sometimes I can learn some things. Sometimes it just calms me down. The other piece for me is I've learned to slow down and reflect on an acronym that I've learned called PTR, preferences, traditions, and requirements. So I try to ask myself, when I, gave this person a task, was I clear about what I wanted, and am I evaluating the success of what they did as to something I preferred, tradition, this is the way it's been done, or the actual requirement? So what I do in the work context is actually to slow myself down by taking 24 hours, evaluating my relationship to what did or did not get done. And those become the practices for me to show up in relationship to a colleague very differently than I would just fueled by emotion.
Yeah, just popping off. Like, yeah, I get that. I can get. Yeah. So, how do you stay open when you're? So, how do you maintain those practices? How do you stay open? Because I know your work, and I know that I see you're all over the place and traveling, and I really applaud your work. And but when you get exhausted and frustrated or feel misunderstood, how do you? I mean, there's a speed bump practice, right? But this might be sort of like we're past that, right? Or you're in a low spot, so you don't have the. How do you stay open when you're when it's getting hot or just a lot?
Yeah, I didn't know this years ago. I've been leaning into it more over the last few years, and it's actually about it. It would be encompassed in one word, and that's rest.
Oh, okay.
And so one of the things that I didn't have a high value for was the notion that you can't stay on the field 24/7. Like in no sport, in no sport does the competitor stay on the field for the whole game. Even in boxing, which is a solo sport, you have 30-second to 60-second breaks in between rounds to sit down on the stool. And I think we need to really embrace this idea of rest and self-care, meaning that when you don't actually have the capacity to show up in ways that are aligned with your values, it's totally fine to take a time out. Give yourself a rest. Say, I'm going to step out of the game for a moment. What that looks like for me is there are times where I just go, you know what? I'm out of the news. I'm not taking in any news. I'm not taking any information because I need a break so I can allow myself to level set so that I can show up with curiosity. Because right now, baby, all I'm bringing is content.
Right, I'm about 2 years into that.
Right? It could be in a work context where you're going, and like there's some dynamics like work and family and others where sometimes you're like, well, I don't have the opportunity to take a break. Well, I would encourage people to nuance that a little bit and go, how do you give yourself a break from seeing yourself as a problem solver in that moment, where you might say, you know what, for this season, I'm going to give myself a rest and I'm just going to go with the flow. Even though I may not necessarily agree with what it is that we're doing, I'm not going to shock my system because right now I need some rest. Like to me, this is about us embracing the notion that we are mammals. And so we need to rest. We cannot allow our systems to stay in, high level, state, with our cortisol levels high, and then think that we're going to be able to access this deep kind of spiritual, emotional reservoir of values 24/7. So I really think rest is a practice that we need to see as much as we see the speed bump practice as a way to navigating the terrain.
I feel like there's some sort of list of commandments that offer one of those is Sabbath and keep it holy. I think is part of it. And I agree with you as someone who is, went from working 80, 100 hours a week to less than that. Although, I mean, my work is not really, it's odd because it's in your brain all the time and you can be, sort of like on call all the time. So what gives you hope that belonging is still possible in this divided world?
So this is going to sound like a very interesting answer. I think one that you'll probably give me a Scooby-Doo look at and be like, really?
Can't wait. Can't wait.
We need another conversation about that. What makes me hopeful about it is the AI technology revolution.
You called it. That is not where I thought you were going, but I'm intrigued.
I'm going to tell you why. Because I think the AI technology revolution is going to disrupt our way of being human within the next 10 to 20 years in such a way that it probably is the only disruption outside of extraterrestrials showing up on this planet that is going to force us into the massive kind of renegotiation with each other and ourselves around what it means to be human. Here's what I mean, to break it down just really quick. I'm a futurist, so I spend a lot of time thinking about the future. Probably, more presently, I spend more time thinking about the future now than I'm spending a lot of time thinking about the present. I think what the future is going to do is we're getting ready to have an incredible shift around the economy. And right now, because of the way that we've all kind of been related to the capitalist system, particularly that we have in the US, we understand our identity through productivity and our ability to generate money. Well, likely what AI is going to do, good or bad, regardless as to how people land on that at the end of that question, is that probably within 10 to 20 years, certainly 30 to 40 years, our economy and our systems are not going to be based on human productivity and our ability to generate resources because of that, which is going to bring up a deep question around what is the purpose of the human being, and what is our purpose, and what does it really mean for us to build community and to relate to one another. And I actually think that the medicine that we need to really have the deep kind of conversations that are necessary are going to only be found when we are really disrupted and don't have the ability to continue to be in the rat race of generating resources because of who can be more productive than others. And I unfortunately think that there's going to be a lot of pain through that. Like to me, I see that as our human society kind of going through a new birth canal of sorts, which means the tearing away of a placenta and a lot of pain and a lot of pressure and a lot of messiness. But I think that the current world that we have is beginning to fall apart because it's built by greed and power and dominance and violence. And I think that the medicine we need is the kind of disruption that's going to force us to come up with a new story about ourselves, and actually see the AI tech revolution as an unfortunate but potentially fortunate disruption that will cause us to form a new story.
Yeah, I had that. I like the framing because I think that AI has the opportunity to be helpful in a lot of ways. As a diabetic who, like, the algorithms and the stuff, I mean, it's not AI, but it's the algorithms and the intelligence for it to manage my intake of insulin and on my, like, I just wear a computer on my body and instead of having to take shots, and I'm a way better control and all that stuff. But all right, so I want to close out with some lightning round questions. All right.
Give it to me.
All right. So these are like short answers. First thing comes to your mind. Belonging is?
Space.
Contempt feels like?
Judgment.
Investigation sounds like?
Openness.
One habit that destroys belonging?
Judgment.
Nice. All right. One habit that builds belonging?
Love.
A question that everyone should ask more often?
Why am I feeling this way?
I like that. What's a question we should avoid asking?
Why are you like that?
I was thinking that was going to be my answer too. Why you like that, bro? Something that you've changed your mind about recently?
The justice movement.
Oh man, I feel like I want to talk more about that. We kind of.
I can say my piece around.
All right, give me a little bit. Give me a little bit.
Where I've changed my mind around it is, I am deeply inspired and consider myself still a part of the justice movement. I do think that in a lot of ways that I was involved in it over the last 10 plus years, I feel like we missed, let me keep it personal and not on others. I missed the opportunity to carry curiosity alongside my aspiration for justice. And at a certain point, I allowed my pain to drive my practice rather than curiosity. And so the way I've changed my mind around the justice moment is the justice movement is I do not believe that a justice movement will be successful in any way unless it is designed in a way with a future that includes the very people who are the active participants in the ecosystem of injustice. And I just find myself in a real return, even more deeply at a heart level, to what King and Fannie Lou and Howard Thurman and Bayard Rustin and like what they were really trying to call us to at the intersection of a deep spiritual and justice movement, which was a world that had a philosophy that did have a real critique around the systems of injustice, but also was very clear about making room for those who were the oppressor. So yeah, I've changed my mind around the notion of, let them figure it out on their own, and hopefully I don't have Stockholm syndrome, but I think I'm finding myself really trying to hold a deep spiritual place.
Man, I feel so connected to you on that. That's like having lived in rural communities and then like watched their pain and listened and heard their pain as a pastor. And like I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who's old union organizer. Like that's his deal. He's from Appalachia, right? So this is a good old boy. And he was talking about we were talking about Fred Hampton and the Rainbow Coalition and like the Young Lords and the Black Panthers and the Patriots. What was that? I can't know.
Young Patriots.
Young Patriots, right? The Young Patriots. Like you looked at those groups, you're like, nah.
Yeah, and we've got to have the nuance. And I think, if I were to even revisit the idea of the Rainbow, coalition of Fred Hampton, God rest his soul, Black Panther in Chicago, murdered by the Chicago police, but he, with when you think about that idea of the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, the Young Patriots, the only thing where I would still add, and this is my little humble, who cares what Ben McBride
I
says.
always care what Ben McBride says, but go ahead.
Well, what I would still add to it is they saw themselves as the proletariat that was going to bring down the ruling class. And to me, the next evolution is, how do we see the existing ruling class as being ones who will still have space to exist in our wider circle of human concern? That is where I am really trying to move towards this notion of, it's not us versus them. It's not the people versus the ruling class, but it is, how do we get a wide circle where those who are the current powerful and privileged of our world and those who are the persecuted and the prevented recognize their interrelatedness to one another and all get a chance to live in the beloved community, a space where we are all reconciled to one another. I know that's going to take probably, 100, 200 years.
Well, it's a cathedral problem, right?
It's the cathedral. And that's why it's going to take us being willing to make decisions now that help to inform the world that we'll never get to see. But I hope we can be brave enough with those speed bumps, with whatever little hacks we can all find. Maybe we can find ways to show up a little bit differently, and hopefully that advances the story of the future.
All right, I got a couple more questions. But first, cathedral problem is a problem that you will not see the end of. So an architect for the cathedral did not ever see the end of the project. So it's something where you can do your work, what you can do, when you can do it, and then the work continues. Okay. So that's a quick little aside for those that had never heard that phrase, the cathedral problem. So what's a book you're reading right now?
A book I'm reading right now is Forget the Alamo, which is actually
Bro, my Texas history teacher would just roll over in its grave over that.
It's a deep, wonderful book around the
Talk about contempt before
of the Alamo
Sorry.
in Texas, and understanding the relationship between the more kind of traditional versus revisionist understanding and conversation. And it's been fascinating to just really, again, approach it in a way that actually has big heartedness for people who have a lot of love for the traditional story of Texas and the Alamo, and for people who are showing up as revisionists. I was up for 3 hours in that book last night. I'll probably jump into it today.
Nice. All right. What are you listening to right now?
I'm sorry.
What are you listening to? Podcast or music or both?
What am I listening to right now? Man, I've just been totally in Stevie Wonder right now, 70s and 80s. It speaks to me. Higher Ground is just it's an old favorite. I don't know if it ever gets old. If I had it on vinyl,
right,
I probably would have broken it by now. But it really speaks to me. And they're not podcasts right now, but he sometimes does some videos. It's on Substack. I've really been digging is the Substack, The Work Within by Sean Ginwright.
Okay. Some
writings as well as some videos. Amazing stuff. And I've just been eating it up like a kid in front of a sweet potato pie at Thanksgiving. I mean, it's just been good to me.
Nice. All right. One last question. The future depends on our willingness to finish the sentence. Change. Nice. All right. Official Ben McBride on on Substack, on Instagram, all over the place. Empower Initiative. Ben, it's been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to see you. We'll hopefully get to be in person, give you a big old hug one of these days. Give my love to your wife and your family. And as always, thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you later.
Right on, dear brother. Appreciate it.
All right, man. Thanks.
All right.